All right, guys, welcome to the show. It's our first podcast episode. How are you both?
Good.
And well,
Can't believe it's
great.
February already.
Yes, the year is going to zip by.
January's a blur, absolutely.
Yeah, yes.
We were supposed to do this last year, Nicole, but glad we're kicking off the year on the right foot.
Well, we would have had a captive audience last year for sure, with everyone stuck in their home offices, and but they wouldn't have that car time. So hopefully we'll get a few more people heading back into the office, driving around the block a little bit more, maybe going to get a coffee, head back home to the home office. But we've begun. So
Good.
Indeed. Way to start.
And we thought a great way to start would be to begin with the Wealth Tech Predictions report that was released at the end of last year. Pete, that was your authorship, and we all kind of contributed to that. But we thought that would be a great way to just talk through where we see what has happened, what will happen, and then, some things that have happened just recently. So we might just start off looking through the report and talking it through. So let's start with number one.
It's always good with predictions to sort of look back on what happened the last year. And the great thing about predictions, if you make enough of them, some of them will eventually come true. But we did have a bit of a crack at last year, and I guess that we covered a few broad themes with advice tech, and our industry moves in technology seems to move quite fast, but in advice doesn't always move as fast. So some of our predictions, maybe we don't know yet whether the thing's going to play out, but certainly some themes are there.
Yeah, true.
I mean, just a couple off the bat, Aaron. We did see RegTech hitting a bit of a wall. I don't know, mate. I think around post-FOFA we saw this wave of RegTech solutions hit the market, and which made a lot of sense from a commercial perspective, given the amount of money being spent on compliance across the industry. But yet to see any real evidence of anyone really jumping out of the blocks at this point.
Why do we think that's happening? Why do we think that there hasn't been the uptake potentially with those products that certainly seem to mitigate risk and bring a lot of efficiencies about in a business, but we're certainly not seeing the uptake that we thought we would?
Yeah, I think it stems from integration. I think that the use case around RegTech, and there's some great solutions in the market already around reading documents and analytics over the top of those. I mean, from a licensee standpoint, RegTech, there's some great solutions out there that make sense on paper, but I think when the rubber hits the road and you need to start thinking about how this, from a software sense, integrates into your systems together with just business process, I think that's where the stumbling block is for a lot of licensees and for advice practices, self-licensed practices as well. So I think there's definitely an opportunity for RegTech to overcome that. I think we're going to talk a little bit later about data and perhaps integration, and we'll be able to sort of talk through that in a bit more detail. But I think it's integration, it's workflow for these practices, and being able to embed it into that business process. And the challenge for a lot of those RegTech players is they're an island. They're out on their own, I think. And when you're sort of sitting outside your CRM and you're using some of these other sort of fintech solutions that are out there, another fintech or RegTech solution inside of that tech stack becomes really unwieldy for a lot of practices, I think. So, yeah, probably integration. Integration is the key one.
Yeah, it's probably.
I think too the commercial models, Aaron. Who's going to pay? There was initially thoughts that licensees would really pay for this, and I guess because we saw so many of the major licensees either wind up operations or sell, and now we're left with a swag of sort of mid-tier licensees, which are, large-ish businesses, but not enormously well capitalised to be huge purchases of software. That's probably been the other barrier, I would have thought, for these RegTechs.
And that's probably a discussion for another day around this, who pays for software, and this historical situation we have in this industry where some advice practices feel like those sorts of costs should be borne by the provider of their license, but any normal business owner pays for any of the services they use in their business. So there's still and I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong in that, but I certainly think that as a business owner, I want to control what I pay for and use, and if I think it would mitigate risk, then I would want to make that investment in that, rather than being arguing over who pays for it. So I think we still have a shift for people to make as to, who pays for these sorts of, where they see the value. And I guess that comes down to if they see the value in it, they should be paying for it. And if not, then they have to have another solution, I guess.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, 100%. Mm.
The one we got wrong, well, sort of wrong, was we thought Vanguard would be out of the blocks faster on their personal advisor services business here in Australia. They've been pretty public about it. I mean, walking away from all that, those institutional mandates and super funds. So I don't think we were sort of wrong, but I still feel they're going to attack this market, and there's a massive role for them to play. But I think many are still waiting to see just how they deploy that proven technology from the US into Australia.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree. And I think, the work that Six Park are doing, and groups like Map My Plan and Open Invest and others that will enter the market are really doing a great job of trying to map out what that looks like. And I know from our experience in working with advice practices from a marketing perspective who have looked at this option that there is a real gap in bridging the gap of a client who would be self-directed versus a client who sees an advisor. So getting them to the point of making an investment on their own, that seems to be where there still needs to be a little bit more hand-holding and some other service solution to get them to that point versus they are just self-directed and they would just do it. So I'm sure that's something that Vanguard and the others are still grappling with.
Yeah, I think the really exciting thing is when they do come to the market, a lot of the large super funds will be watching really closely, and I know many of the large super funds are already thinking about this stuff as well. So that's definitely one of the most exciting things that'll happen in the next 2 years is how that pans out. So sort of wrong, but waiting to see.
Yeah, totally agree.
So we'll 50-50 there. Yeah. Another partially right was the data ecosystem, Aaron. And you just get an increasing sense that I think we're partially right on this, that licensees and advisors now have an expectation that their software partners and platform partners openly share data with their permissions, and that this whole we don't integrate is no longer an excuse.
Yeah. I think the two things here is integration and data, and it's about ubiquity of that data, being able to have data flow through whatever your core system is to, other partner systems that you've got. And I think this, to that first point we're talking about with RegTech, that is one of the inhibitors of RegTech, that lack of integration, the lack of, embedding that into the core workflow process and sharing of data. So, I think, there's a lot that's going to be happening in the data space. I think that for a long time, there's certainly been some incumbent, fintech solutions out there that have really stored data. They're beginning to open up their ecosystems via integrations and start thinking about sharing data. So I think, the notion of true partnerships between, vendors and systems is certainly starting to happen. It's probably still in its infancy though, but it's starting to grow. And when you look to some other verticals, industry verticals, you sort of look at, Salesforce and even, some of the, Microsoft Dynamics environments where you've got partners in a true ecosystem, working in collaboration with the vendor and sharing data. And I think that level of maturity between integrations and, that maturity of, the way that data is stored and, and transmitted and collaborated on will really unlock this piece for sure. And hopefully that brings with it innovation, really enables a lot of these businesses that are building really innovative tools around the outside for advisors.
Yeah, and I think it certainly needs to speed up. I think, like you say, we're seeing some innovation, but I still think it's happening way too slowly. And I think if you ask a lot of advice practices, one of their biggest time-consuming activities and fears is not having the correct data feeds and having to fix up situations where they don't have those correct data feeds. And if we're looking at the ability to feed data across software, a lot of advice practices are now using software that is completely out of the realms of wealth, and it's a mainstream, social media tool or email marketing tool or whatever, and they're having to try and, bolt things together using tools like Zapier or some other connector, which then obviously does create some security risks if you send in information via other sources, and we really want to mitigate those security risks. So I think those tools within the industry need to really open up their systems a lot faster and more efficiently, and be working on helping advisors create better technology sort of infrastructures within their business that are safer and less likely to break. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and given we saw some pretty public cybersecurity attacks on advice businesses, and obviously the interest that ASIC now has in that area, I think that's only become a bigger issue moving forward. So, yeah, great call out, Nicole.
Yeah.
On that. And the final one was, I guess, the final two that we predicted were sort of interrelated. One was around, the platform wars, we'll call it, which is, obviously not just the major platforms, but also the mid platforms. A bit of a war for distribution and, in fact, technology being a bit of a battleground for those. And we thought that war would only intensify in 2021. And we also predicted that NetWealth would acquire Praemium as well, which sort of hasn't happened, but an offer was made. Whether it was taken or not, we can't predict that. But obviously, NetWealth's interest in Praemium's non-custodial solutions is quite evident, and Praemium's had an enormous growth in the last couple of years. But talking about M&A, Aaron, there's been lots of it from the platforms, and probably more to come.
I think so, yeah. And this is as much about value, to your point earlier, Nicole, around delivering more value, to end users, advisors, advice practices. And so it is interesting to see, Hub24 and some of the acquisitions they're making, as well as those other platforms that you've mentioned, Pete, and just thinking about how they create and deliver value to advisors in the future. And I think that's a really good thing, because, a lot of advisors are sort of thinking, we've got some incumbent fintech providers that we currently get services off, but, most advice practices, if not all of them, are using, most of these platforms or a couple of platforms. So it's a great source of innovation, and let's face it, they've got the balance sheet to be able to execute on that as well. So, yeah, I think it's exciting.
It's been good I think it's good for the fintechs too, because so much of wealth was controlled by the big four banks up to the last couple of years, and anyone that's tried to do an IT project with a bank would understand that how long and expensive and complex it can be, and the platform seem particularly open to partnerships and enabling fintech. So I think it's they're playing a huge role in innovation, albeit they're product providers, and that's fine, but someone has to put their hands in their pocket, and if it's the platform, so be it.
Yeah, and I think the whole engagement piece has really driven this, and what we've had to deal with for the last couple of years, and certainly some states in Australia are being very limited by their face-to-face contact with clients, that the ability to engage with a client in that face-to-face meeting went. And so, you're trying to deliver an SOA or, a review meeting via Zoom. You don't have your normal kind of banter that you have when you're in the office, or an extended meeting to sort of reacquaint or whatever it might be. They're having to show value in other ways. But they also have discovered that presenting an SOA that's a Word document or some sort of printed document is really hard via Zoom. So having the ability to model out, a scenario to look at that goals-based advice and give them a benchmark of where they were and where they are now and where they need to go, that's far more visual. And without if you don't have a whiteboard set up, or you're not technically minded and you haven't been able to do it with your Zoom set up, they need to fill that gap. So I think the product providers have had to, step in and look at, like you say, those partnerships or their own, like look at IOOF and their whole Wealth Central scenario and what that can potentially do. And I think they'll all be looking at that, or partnering with someone who has a capability to provide that modelling. Or data that feeds into some sort of presentation tool to make that a lot easier. So I think it's all been sort of kicked along a little bit faster, which is a good thing for advisors.
Client portal was definitely a conversational topic for a later podcast. I think a lot of businesses picked up Zoom and Teams, and that was quite easy to implement during COVID. But something that was probably a bit more challenging for most practices was, if I'm not using a client portal, I haven't thought about that. How do I actually implement that as a strategy in my business and how do I engage clients. So yeah, definitely something we have conversations with practices a lot about.
Yeah. And like you said, I think it's one definitely to go into a bit more detail about how an advised practice can use it to, mitigate risk, to be able to deal with clients that are outside of service offering, all sorts of stuff. There's some really interesting things, that can be done from a client perspective and a marketing perspective with client portals for sure. Well, not bad, Pete. Really hit some of them on the head. So do you want to...
a solid B.
Yeah.
We'll give that.
Not bad.
Last year.
Not bad. I think...
my high school experience, pretty much.
Me too. It's all right.
Yeah.
And then, and so we'll probably... Do you want to look at the 2022 predictions first and kind of... Let's have a look at some of those.
Sure. So, I guess probably let's start with the more controversial one, which was around consolidation. There was a bit of press, and the trade press love a controversial headline, and some of it was taken a little bit out of context, but that's okay. But we did think it was important to discuss, that we are seeing advisors inundated with technology choices, and arguably some in the wrong places. Over the years, NetWealth done some awesome work on mapping out the advice tech marketplace, and that wheel just keeps getting bigger and bigger, yet the challenges don't really change. And so we just put the prediction there that we felt that the advice tech market was probably a little bit overinflated with certain applications. I think I picked on fact finds as one of them. That there's just so many fact find tools out there, and do we need this many? That said, some research we've done recently for a client said that over half of advisors want to move to a digital fact find in 2022. So, there is demand there for it. I guess the question really is, for things like that, is it a feature versus a product? Is it a business in itself? And happy to be wrong, but we do get the sense that you're going to see these tools collaborate more closely together, because certain parts of the advice process that just intuitively fit together. And so having things like standalone fact find digital engagement tools that don't necessarily connect intuitively to other things don't make a lot of sense. I don't know what you think, Aaron, but that was sort of my take.
No, I 100% agree. And I think pointed out there is that, to your point, Nicole, it's digital engagement. I think a lot of the tools we see that are fact find driven are just a form, that you're sending to a client to collect some data. But, as we know through COVID, there's a whole lot more engagement that needs to be wrapped around that experience for a client than just sending them a form. And I think that, to your point, Peter, it seems to me like it needs to be embedded in a client portal, or there needs to be sort of some other sort of concierge onboarding process that sits around them that ultimately makes the client experience really great and frictionless. So that's probably my thoughts on that.
And I think, in your past lives, you would know that there's plenty of advice practices that are already using software that have those capabilities that they haven't implemented. So I think that then comes back to, if we look at the NetWealth kind of landscape of looking at all the tech tools used, there is so much crossover in a lot of those tools. And so we're getting to the point where some practices might be looking for the next shiny bright object of software that's going to solve all their problems, when they've already got software that does that. It just hasn't been implemented well within their business, or features turned on. Client portals are a great example of that. But using online capabilities to get client information updated on a regular basis. And then that also comes back to processes and workflows and automation and things like that. And so I think there is, definitely, to your point, Pete, that introducing another product doesn't necessarily remove the problem. And, the problem may already be able to be solved if a practice were to maybe put some investment into looking at what they've already got and having a good review of that and seeing if they've already got some capabilities there that they could, update.
Yep. Yeah. And again, these are all really good sort of products in their own right in terms of what they do. They definitely do what they say they're going to do. We just think it's quite logical that they, in order to find distribution and minimum sort of scale and product market fit, you're just going to see these businesses either merge, form joint ventures, will potentially be acquired by some of the larger advice tech providers because they fill a gap, and that's
well, that's
not a
right. I
bad
think that's
outcome
it.
if
It's not a
that
bad thing
delivers.
because, like you say, a lot of people start these businesses because they want to be acquired at some point. So that's a good thing. If you're a software owner, great, and you've built a great product, and then those advisors who are already using your product, then they're going to potentially get the backing of a bigger company who's got deeper products and can make that better. And then it's going to be added onto something else, and so then the whoever's bought it has now enhanced what they've got and they're using with someone else. So I do think it can be a win-win, and it's like you say, they're all great products, but consolidation would probably be, better for everyone in the longer term for some of these standalone systems.
Well, yeah. And RegTech falls into this basket as well. I think there's some really great RegTech solutions that we've sort of touched on briefly earlier that, bringing those together with some of those other fintechs that are in the market probably makes sense, bringing together a set of features that actually make a more comprehensive product in its own right. So could be interesting to see what happens there.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, so hopefully none of those providers took offence at your... but,
Look, a few. I had a couple reach out directly, and a couple were like, "Oh, that's not our plan, and we're quite viable," and that's fine. Like, it's just an observation. Some were, very pleased to see things like that because they are looking for that. They are looking for some sort of strategic partnership. You've got to stick your neck out a little bit with these things, but it's quite intuitive. And I think the other lens too that we probably didn't discuss before and it was in the context of the report, is we've got a really shrinking advisor market here in Australia, which is for a whole host of reasons that we're not going to talk about today. But that is the reality, and that market of advisors who are software purchasers, who are basically those people providing holistic financial advice, has never been smaller. Yet they've never had more technology choice. So ultimately, that's what's driving it. I think if we had rapid growth in advisor numbers and those sort of things happening, then you could sustain that. But I think those nice-to-have technology solutions may struggle without real distribution. That said, potentially some of the gatekeepers of software decisions, being the large licensees institutions, are gone. So you can attack the IFA market in a more open way. But as everyone knows, that's a really hard game and takes time. And do you have enough capital to see
that's right. And unless your software has got the capability of, moving into foreign locations such as the UK or the US, then that is definitely going to be a problem. And some of these they will have the capability to do that if they have the wherewithal to take it offshore. But probably the majority of them are focusing on the Australian market, and I would say we're looking at a 5-year turnaround before potentially the industry rebuilds again, and we do get that advisor base back. And so that's a long time in software land. So changes will be interesting.
Absolutely.
So anything else on the?
And I guess the other theme that we spoke about was just the greater involvement of the mega technology companies in our industry, who have probably been there but not obvious, I guess is how I would describe it, in the last 5 to 10 years. I've been quite surprised. The last 2 years in particular, we've really seen Salesforce, Microsoft, to a lesser extent Google, show a lot more interest in our industry. I think a lot of it's the battle for cloud computing. Those businesses are basically very large cloud businesses now, and I think where they thought they were getting large cloud deals through the banks, they've now worked out that wealth is its own channel, and they've got to have a strategy there. You're probably closer to that stuff than I am, Aaron. I mean, what are your thoughts on why that's happening and who's going to win?
Yeah, look, I don't know if I'd be bold enough to make a prediction on who's going to win out of that group there, but I think, something that's really of interest to me is just, the tools, the solutions that, Microsoft and Google are bringing to market, which, for a long time they've both had, a tool set in productivity. They've done, mail, email, they've done, documents, collaboration, that sort of thing. But, in recent years, they've started to bring tools to market that are business focused tool sets, but I think they, have some real application to us in the wealth space. Everyone's probably familiar with Microsoft Teams, and, I think everyone looks at Teams and goes, great, that's a really good, web conferencing, solution. But, when you start to dig under the surface a little bit from the strategy, you sort of go, actually, Teams is a whole lot more than just web conferencing. It's effectively this hub, this collaboration hub in the future. And I think, just looking at some of the things that Microsoft is doing in that space to deliver, applications embedded into Teams that, will enable, not just video conferencing collaboration, but, sharing of, rooms externally to, external clients in particular. Sort of just take some of these solutions to a whole new level. And, again, we don't have a lot of time on today's session, but it's probably worthwhile unpacking a bit more in the future. But, just touching on data, which is one of those predictions we had earlier as well, both these businesses, both Microsoft and Google, have, invested a lot of money into common data architecture. And, it will enable and use to come things like, analytics. Power BI is a really good example. And, a lot of the practices we speak to are starting to use Power BI. They're sort of bringing in spreadsheets and, they're doing, that sort of traditional business reporting. But, the suite of products that these cloud providers are bringing to market are pretty amazing. And I think that'll have a real flow down effect to, small businesses, small medium businesses in the future. And so it's definitely a space to watch.
And I think there's something quite attractive about having, contained in the one environment as well. From a security perspective, from transfer of information, Absolutely. For, not having to have less external tools. I think that will be attractive over time. It does puzzle me as to why they would be so interested in our industry, because it's not a big footprint. My take, and I'm interested to hear what you guys both think, but I think they probably see the opportunity with the direct market, and they are probably going to be doing a lot of research as they go through this process to find out about how it works, to maybe be able to enter into it directly in various ways. But interested to hear what you think.
Yeah. I think, Microsoft's really interesting. I noticed the other day they were pushing me notifications to set up my personal Teams account. And when I did, I jumped on, and the first thing it had was collaborate with your family, collaborate with your school people. And so they, I think they're trying to cut in on Zoom a little bit, which a lot of people use through the pandemic for personal reasons. But think about a client advisor experience. If I have my advisor and I have a Teams account and they have a professional Teams package, and we can collaborate, share data really easily, and do our meetings through Teams, and it all works quite nicely, then you can absolutely see the benefit of that. I think commercially for them, they're in everything. It's growth at all costs. Their valuations and share prices have a huge amount of growth implied, so they're just going to be everywhere they can be. But I do ultimately think that they understand that the very large banks and financial services companies are probably arguably some of the largest buyers of cloud services. So to have a wealth capability in a financial services cloud is just critical.
Yeah. The go-to-market strategy is very much hinged around partnerships as well. Independent software vendors, delivering apps that are in their ecosystem, integrations between, line of business apps that are specific to financial services and wealth. We see this in other verticals like healthcare and manufacturing. There's specific apps in those lines of business, and I think Microsoft and Google know that, so they're partnering quite closely with those businesses to bring that stuff to market.
And I guess they figure they want the bigger share of everything, and if they don't kind of take all of it, then someone else could come in and take parts of it as well. So from a market share perspective, you do want to cover all of the real estate, knowing that it could be bigger in the future as well, and kind of grow with everyone. But yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. They're not companies that we're used to seeing in financial services in Australia, and it's going to be very interesting to watch how they move into that space. And Salesforce, definitely, they've been kind of making moves probably on the product side of things and within the big corporates. But to be at an advisor level, that's going to be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, I'm happy to make a prediction. I think in the small business market, which is advisors, it will be Microsoft. It is ubiquitous. It is on every desktop. People are already paying for Microsoft. There's already a relationship there. It won't necessarily be distributed through Microsoft. I think there'll be a whole bunch of, as Aron said, partners that will build products. It's already happening. There's already a couple that are already out there. And I think we'll just see a more developed ecosystem of people configuring solutions on Azure.
Yeah, definitely. Great. All right.
And the next one was I think it's digital advice.
Yeah. So I guess, talking about that whole digital advice space, which, it's been a hot topic for a couple of years. And there was, from an advisor perspective, it was very much seen as muscling into their territory, cutting their grass, if you like. But I think we've seen that change, and I certainly know with the clients that we deal with and from a marketing side of things within Socialised, that we're seeing those advisors who are looking at marketing opportunities within their business are now seeing the ability to potentially offer different service offerings to clients via that digital advice scenario. And it's because we're a unique industry, and that you can, as business owners, say, I want a niche and I want to deal with certain type of clients. And that's great. You can do that. But we have this unique position whereby those certain clients then have kids and other family members. And there can be the desire to want to support those other family members. One, because you want to support your clients, but two, because those other family members could be the recipient of your client's money in time to come. And if you don't create a relationship with them, then we know a big portion of that money goes out the door to another advisor that the younger client has created a connection with. So this digital advice option is now sort of being seen as another, on-ramp for clients. So is that what you're both thinking and kind of what you've seen and heard?
I think we were obviously, there's a couple of themes. I mean, one is what we said before, shrinking advisor numbers, still the fourth largest and ever growing retirement savings pool in the world. And right now you've got a whole bunch of millennial investors getting burnt for the first time in a crypto correction and a stock market correction, which probably will make them drift back towards quality advice, I hope. So that's a trend. These robo investing or digital advice solutions have been around for quite some time in Australia, and I have a huge amount of admiration for the people that have been building those companies in our market here locally, because they've been at it for many, many years, and probably only now they're starting to get their due attention. Anyone that takes on a direct-to-consumer business model is very ambitious.
Definitely.
It's a tough slog. Anyone will tell you that. And it's been quite interesting to see a lot of them adapt their distribution strategy to be B2B, to be partnering with advisors, as you say, Nicole, and white labels and partnering with licensees. Inevitably, you can't help but think that the people with the most skin in the game is the large asset managers and fund managers to protect their savings, to protect that pool of money that's not advised. And like we saw with UBS acquiring Wealthfront in the States last week, you just can't help but think that those larger asset managers are probably going to just acquire those capabilities rather than, spending 3 years in-house trying to build things in-house. It is simply easier just to buy something that's already in the market. So, Aaron, I know you think a lot about this, but it's obvious to me that's what's going to happen.
UBS, UBS had done this previously. They had stood up an offer called Smart Wealth, I think it was, in the US, and I think that recently they sort of completely panned it. They sort of said we just didn't do it well. Execution was really poor, and it didn't get the outcomes we were looking for. So I think UBS acquiring Wealthfront here is pretty interesting, and it's to that point that millennial base of clients that they probably don't have coverage of at the moment is definitely a long-term play for them, so they can sort of bring them through that channel. What will be interesting to see is how they bring in a Wealthfront style offer into probably a more traditional advice model. You've got your advisor, but then you've also got a completely digital offer as well, and probably somewhere in between there is where it will land, which would be a hybrid model. But being able to integrate those two together will be really interesting. But look, it's unsurprising, because you sort of look at Goldman Sachs and even JB Weir, they've both in recent years acquired robo businesses as well for that same reason. That millennial base of clients that they want to have that pipeline with in the future for advice. So yeah, interesting.
I found it pretty ironic, Aaron, that a year or two ago the founder of Wealthfront put an article out saying that he thought hybrid was a joke and was never going to work. And he's now been acquired by a business that's a direct hybrid strategy. I suppose when you're being acquired, it doesn't matter. But do you feel a little bit like the hybrid thing is just having an each-way bet?
We're
just not sure whether it's going to work or not.
I think the difficulty is always getting clients to make that decision to invest, and I think the hybrid model is required. Like, I think there's always a certain part of the market that will go and do it alone. But I think they are self-directed. They will always be self-directed. They would never have a look in, with an advisor anyway, because they're not interested in that. But I think there is a big part of the market that needs some hand-holding. And I think that's where the hybrid model will come into play, to be able to get those clients onto these platforms and start their journey. Because once they start their journey, then it's easy to build from that. But it's those first steps, and maybe having someone to sort of check with. But I think there's a big financial literacy gap. That's the problem. And so that's why crypto and NFTs, and not saying they're bad, but there's going to be some opportunities there, but they definitely are capturing the interest of that market. Yeah.
It's still amazing to me that those things have attracted so much interest, because we're on the tail of the strongest bull market we've ever seen in history, with share prices where they've gone, particularly US stocks, and yet crypto has still attracted so many people in parallel with that. I know they're arguably correlated. Do you think, Nicole, like, it's just been better marketed? We just don't know how to market advice and slow as she goes.
Absolutely, and that was going to be my point. Is that the crypto market, there's so many people are sharing their experiences of how to buy and sell currency, how that currency fits into your wealth landscape, the tools to do it, NFTs, all that sort of stuff, So there is a lot of information that's being shared there. But we as an industry have sort of covered a lot of that, because advisors are too scared about sharing information that is freely available out there. But because, they think that, they give away their secrets. But the reality is, it's like saying, well, I can paint my house. Do I want to paint my house? No, I don't. I'm going to pay someone else to paint my house. And then an advisor is exactly that. Or that we know they're an expert in financial advice, and they're going to tell us what to do, and they're going to help, me make the right decisions. And I think the more we can share that information to get people started, the more likely they'll get advice further down the track, when they're going to be a better client for an advisor who's charging higher fees. But you've got to be able to get them onto something, and you've got to be able to teach them, about what they're doing, and that'll make them better clients down the track.
Yeah, I just think crypto and the people who promote it, which are now sponsoring a lot of the footy teams and all the rest of it, they've just done a wonderful job of creating this tribalism, and people start advocating for what they invest in. I know there's a scarcity element to crypto built into it a little bit, but they just commanded attention. And I just don't think the robo-advisors or anyone in this sector, for that matter, have been able to command any attention on people's phones between 7 and 9:30 p.m. when they're looking at their phones and watching
It's
Netflix.
Not exciting. And that's exactly it. Like, if you look at NFTs, they're built on the back of communities. That's what makes them so popular, generally speaking, is the community around the non-fungible tokens. So when you look at financial advice, there's no community there unless you've got, say, your own membership portal, which we do work with clients who've set up that, and they're great because they become a safe place. I mean, here's another topic for another day, but a lot of people have a lot of shame around money, or they have a lot of fear around money. And so they want safe spaces to be able to ask questions that they maybe think are stupid. And so there is a comparison game that goes on. And if you've got a safe community to be able to ask questions, then you may be more likely to make that, next step to invest, especially if you're in that sort of robo solution. Yep. So huge opportunity there, for those advisors who are taking that step.
Indeed.
Agree. But I think the prediction was we'll see a lot of investment, and I think, Aaron, it'll be a combination of buy, build, and rent for these, because there's a speed to market issue for these major asset managers.
And I think, if we look at the industry as a whole, and if we even spoke to sort of some of those individual software providers, I think they'd all say they're excited about the industry, especially the ones that I speak to. They're excited about the industry. It's probably the first time in many years that we've had some really exciting things on the horizon, and ways for the advisors to sort of take back control in educating Australian consumers about advice. And these software players can play a real, a role in helping to move that along. And I think it's going to be even more interesting in 2022.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the laws of supply and demand are very much in favour of advisors right
Absolutely.
now. Absolutely.
Which, probably means that I know the headlines like to say that advisors can reduce their prices, but I think we all know that that's not going to happen, and nor should it happen. And I think that advisors I speak to, I'm probably more likely to be telling them they should be putting their fees up and then offering this other on-ramp solution for a digital perspective, and turning off fees for those clients who don't need it, and free up a space for a client who does and wants to pay full freight. But being able to be in a position to offer some guidance and coaching in other ways to those clients who are, coming on via a digital solution. I think, I'd love to see more of that happening. So we will see. Yeah. Well, that's probably a good place to wrap it up. I think
we said we capped these at 40 minutes, Nicole.
Yeah.
Much time as we'll
Yeah. So if you've listened for this long, thank you.
Great.
We're going to have some great speakers on. We're really we see an opportunity to be sharing information and working with lots of businesses who've got a great story to tell, and those who are open about working with others in the industry and making advice better for Australians and helping advisors create better businesses. So we've got some great speakers coming your way. Everyone's got any feedback, they can send us an email at hello@finuragroup.com. We're all on social media, so connect with Aron, Pete or myself on social media, LinkedIn, all of them. And feel free to slide into our DMs if you've got any feedback or would like to appear on the show. So we'd love to talk to anyone who's keen as well. But that's it. Nice to have you guys. See you next time.
Thank you. See you next time, guys.
Thanks, Nicole.
Bye.
Well hosted. Cheers.